is this brief mortal life, if not the pursuit of legacy?
Hey guys, this is Mike, and I'd like to introduce you to Green and Black. This is a new project here at Movie Punditry. This is going to be a weekly recap show of the HBO series House of the Dragon that I will be doing with various people throughout the weeks. Randall is, although he is famously not a Game of Thrones guy, he will be on the show periodically to discuss it from an outsider's point of view, and we may get some other people on who are more deeply invested in Game of Thrones lore. But anyway, we are here to talk about the first episode of House of the Dragon, and I wanted to just kind of give you kind of a recap as to where we are and where this comes from. So this is all based on a book that George R. R. Martin had written, which is it's a prequel to A Song of Ice and Fire, but it's also, the book is not written as a novel per se. It's actually written kind of as a textbook. It's probably the more accurate way to do it. It's called Fire and Blood, and it's written from the point of view of a maester who is telling the story of the Targaryen Civil War, which is also known as the Dance of Dragons, which occurred well before the events that we see in Game of Thrones. Specifically, the story we picks up 172 years before the birth of Daenerys Targaryen. This entire series is going to be based on the Targaryen family, and everything is going to be relevant to what happens to that family. For instance, the time is counted. You'll see it's counted as AC, which means after conquest, which is when Aegon the Conqueror came and took over Westeros. This is about 100 years after that, a couple more than that. And everything is going to be based on that. So we are going to pick up right at the beginning, just to give you a quick rundown of what happens in this episode before we really start talking about it. There's a king whose name is Jaehaerys, and he's called the Old King. He's reigned for a very long time, but he's very ill. He does not have any male heirs. He had 2 sons who died, and so he is going to have to pick a successor. They are very worried in Westeros about succession, because they know that if there's any doubt about who is going to become the next king after Jaehaerys dies, then a war is going to break out. And this has been an unprecedented time of peace and prosperity for Westeros, and they want that to continue. So they want a definite plan in place in terms of succession. And so there's 2 real choices here, neither one of which are direct descendants of Jaehaerys. They're both grandchildren. One is Queen or Princess Rhaenys, and the other is Prince Viserys. And Rhaenys has a better claim to the throne. She is older. She is a more direct descendant of Jaehaerys, but the decision is made that they cannot have a woman sit on the Iron Throne and be king of Westeros. Jaehaerys calls what's called the Great Council, which is all the lords and nobles from the entire country of Westeros are summoned to Harrenhal, which is the largest castle in all of Westeros. And we've seen Harrenhal in Game of Thrones, 2nd season, 3rd season. It was the base of operations for Roose Bolton and later Tywin Lannister, where Arya was the cupbearer to Tywin Lannister. That was Harrenhal. This is a much better rendition of Harrenhal. This show has about 10 times the budget of Game of Thrones did, and so you're going to see a lot better digital effects, and you're going to see a lot better set pieces. And after this council, the council votes, and the council decides that Viserys should be the next king. And the show picks up during the reign of King Viserys, and he is facing his own crisis of who's going to be his heir. He only has a daughter. His wife, Emma, has either lost or stillborn several children, several male heirs, but he does not have a male heir. So the heir presumptive is his brother Daemon. who's played by Matt Smith fantastically. And Daemon he's reckless, and he is very brash, and people are worried that he's not stable enough to be the king. Viserys, even though he is seen by many to be weak, he is actually an excellent king. And he listens to his counselors, he listens to the lords, and he tries to make a decision that is going to keep the peace, because that's what he's interested in. So he knows that if he names his daughter Rhaenyra as the next king, there's going to be strife, but he also knows that if he names his brother Daemon, there's also going to be strife. So he is desperate to have a male heir. We pick up his wife is in the late stages of a troubling pregnancy. She is not particularly healthy, but he is so convinced that there's going to be a male heir that he calls a tournament, much like we saw in the first episode of Game of Thrones. And this tournament is to celebrate the birth of the male heir who hasn't been born yet. Long story short, during the tournament, Emma goes into labor. The child is breech. In those days, they could not perform a cesarean section, so it was the mother or the child. Viserys decides to save the child at the expense of the mother, and turns out that the child dies immediately anyway after birth. And so now he has no wife, now he has no male heir. He is forced to make a determination, and rather than pick his brother, who will cause all kinds of strife, he decides that he is going to pick his daughter, who he has been raising in court, and he has been teaching to be a good leader. Other than the fact that she's a woman, there's no reason she wouldn't be qualified for it. Not the fact that she doesn't want it. But at the end of the episode, we see that he has in fact decided, and he does in fact summon all the lords and all of his bannermen to come and kneel and declare fealty to Rhaenyra as the heir. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, and there's a lot of other stuff going on here. At the very end, we see that he gets together with Rhaenyra, and he tells her of a dream that Aegon had of a danger in the north and a long winter that's to come. And that dream he wrote into a poem and called The Song of Ice and Fire, and that was been passed down from king to king. And with the object of, when this time comes, that the danger from the north descends upon Westeros, that the country will need to come together to fight it, which of course is something that we see, 175 years in the future, to varying degrees of success in the latter seasons of Game of Thrones. But this is one of the things about the show, is because it's a prequel and because it's based on a book that has been finished, we know where it's going to go. If you've read this book, you know what happens to these people. You know where this is kind of going. And the producers have made it clear that even though there's source material, the source material is told in universe from a point of view of a maester who may have an agenda and who may be incorrect about some things. So we may see some differences between what's going on in the book and in the series. But I would imagine that it's going to hew pretty closely to what's going on. And in fact, this first episode is any indication, this is going to be really close to the book, because George R.R. Martin is a consultant on this. He has been working with the producers very closely. He was involved in the writing of this show, of the pilot and the early stages of this show. And from what we've seen, this really connects very closely to what this book has laid out. So I would imagine this is going to be more of, let's see how this plays out, rather than let's see what happens, because if you've read the books, then you know what happened. Just a couple of things that I wanted to point out is that as Viserys is telling his daughter about the story of the White Walkers, we see that he has the Valyrian steel cat's paw dagger in his possession, the one that Arya eventually uses to kill the Night King. So this is a connection between the two shows. How Peter Baelish wound up with it, we have no idea. Maybe we'll find out, maybe we won't. There's a long time in between. But that dagger is carried apparently by the King of Westeros in these times, the Targaryen king, in the event that the long winter comes. So that's a really interesting connection. Those of you who are fans of Game of Thrones, there's a lot of fan service in this episode in terms of place names and family names And, we hear about Hightower, we hear about Storm's End, we hear about Dragonstone, and we have the Baratheons, all kinds of things. So you are going to find out that there's going to be a lot of connection between these two shows. This show's obviously going to dive pretty deeply into the role of women in Westeros and the role of the difference between men and women. Can women rule? That's a big question in all this. And the last thing that I'm going to say, I'm going to keep this short, but the last thing that I'm going to say is the title of this project here, Green and Black, is going to refer very specifically to the two sides in the Civil War. One side is the green side, one side is the black side. Those are the colors of the two basically houses that are going to be dealing with this. And there's going to be a thing in the future called the Green Council and the Black Council. I'm not going to spoil too much for it. And I'm going to have to figure out how much of what I know about what happens is going to wind up in this podcast, because obviously I do not want to spoil it for anybody. But be aware as you go forward and listen to this that there may be some mild spoilers. But in any case, I'm going to wrap it up today for this first episode. I'm going to imagine that it's going to pick up pretty seriously next week. I'll be honest with you guys, I just really kind of conceived of this after I saw the show and that I wanted to do this. So I wanted to get something out and get an introduction out and let you know that this is coming. But going forward for the next 9 episodes, we're going to be a lot better prepared and a lot more ready, because I'll know that I'm going to be talking about this. I didn't really even realize this until last night that I was going to be doing this. But I hope you come along for the journey. It's going to be really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to the show, because if the first episode is any indication of how this is going to be, it's really going to be awesome. All right? So thanks for listening, and I will talk to you guys next week.